Surprising.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of VisionCast. Today we're going to talk about one of the hottest topic right now. Everyone is buzzing about AI. But AI, not just like, AI, we're not going to talk about general AI, but we're going to talk about AI in a very specific segment of retail where it is buzzing and impacting a lot. Today, to talk about this, we have a very experienced person from one of the largest retailer and the shoes, I'm sure, you're aware of, New Balance. Josh, he's a Senior Director, Data and AI from New Balance. Welcome, Josh, for the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So how's everything in the world of AI going on?
Oh, I mean, it's nonstop. I've only been at New Balance for about 3 months, and my schedule's already packed. I've got a lot of people that want to talk to me and learn about AI and the uses of AI. So there was no easing into this job. I just jumped right in.
Absolutely. So, when we talked about the majority of the folks, in AI, they started their journey on a data. So, can you talk about, your journey, how you get into the AI from data, and how those are two correlated with each other?
Yeah, sure. So I never grew up wanting to become head of data science at a fashion company or anything like that. That was never my goal. But I actually started as a biomedical researcher. So I have a PhD in molecular physiology and biophysics from the University of Iowa. I was a neuroscientist at Tufts University for a few years. And then I've been a data scientist for a little over 10 years. And so this was in 2014 when data science was in all the magazines as the hottest job in the nation. And there was a huge demand for figuring out how do you bring machine learning and AI to companies. And so I kind of joined during that hype wave and made the switch from being an academic researcher to a data scientist in 2014. And it was it was a little bit of a challenging transition, right? It's all numbers. No matter whether you're studying how the brain works or figuring out how many products you can sell, what price you should set them at, there's all numbers at the base somehow, right? So that was an easy part of the transition, but one of the harder parts is, when you're working in academia, you think about things in terms of months or years to get something done, but that doesn't really cut it in the business world, right? You need to get results in weeks, months. You've got to move a lot faster. So, at the base, the core ML, AI, data, how do you make data work for you to accomplish your goals? That was always there, but transferring those skills to retail took a little bit of time and took a little bit of experience.
Absolutely. I know the AI been around for a while, but I think the biggest buzz that's coming up with the generative AI, and what I've read recent reports saying the end user actually got the hang of ChatGPT, and now they understand what AI is. So, but I know different industry have a different perspective of it. But can you talk about then specific to retail, how they are adopting AI, and what does the transformation look like in a retail industry?
Yeah, sure. So I'll these terms are a little bit fuzzy, but I'll sort of set definitions that we can use as part of this conversation. So, there's generative AI, which is all the ChatGPT, Mid-Journey. You're interacting with a chatbot, and there's math in it that you don't see, but it ends up producing text or images or audio or video that you can interact with, right? So that's generative AI. And then there's the more traditional predictive AI that is still very, very useful, right? It's not the hype, it's not the buzzworthy AI right now, but just being able to create better demand forecasts, better optimization of where you put your products, trying to understand your customers at a deeper level, or how your stores are performing. In retail, especially in fashion, the language of fashion is text and images, right? So generative AI absolutely has an impact. But once you've kind of created your product, how do you figure out how much you should purchase from your factories, or how much you should make to put in your stores? How much do you reserve for e-commerce? How much do you put in each store to make sure you don't stock out, right? These very basic supply chain logistic questions still aren't a solved problem in many retailers, right? And that's just on the supply side. You still have how you interact with your customers, how do you market to them effectively, how do you measure that? So, anywhere that numbers has an effect in a retail setting, AI can have some sort of impact. So it's really dependent on making sure that you are deploying AI that's going to be aligned with the goals of your company. I think that that's a really critical point, because you don't want to just jump on a hype train. You want to do it with some sort of purpose behind it, and you think carefully about how do you measure it? How do you figure out if it worked? Like, that's all very, very important in actually making AI transformative rather than just performative.
And then you mentioned about predictive AI, and then generative, and then now just like agentic AI. So there's a lot of things coming. I was talking to one of the analysts. They're saying that you don't know, what other AI is gonna come, but they're gonna keep coming. So you cannot. But you mentioned about the supply chain, and supply chain has different aspects, upstream, midstream, downstream. But can you talk about, in very specific, that right now with the AI, what is the most use case or very specific use case which is actually impacting the customer? It's you see at the front of the customer where they are buying journey, or is it an omni-channel? Where you see the most impacting use case with the AI?
Yeah, and I think you could think about it in two different ways, because you have impactful AI that is affecting the customer in ways that they can see. And so if you have a chatbot on a website, a generative AI way to interact with a customer without requiring a person, like that, a lot of companies are leveraging those kind of tools, right? And I don't really think that there's a lot of testing being done. There's a lot of figuring out how do we make this work for customers in a way that's really going to impact the bottom line. And I don't think we're there yet, right? The tools are being developed. They're still kind of fuzzy. They're still kind of not as accurate as you might want them to be. Like AI models still hallucinate, for example. But how do you actually turn it into something that's going to generate money? And I think if you think about things that are interact with the customer directly, it's a lot around advertising, right? So personalization. And where I think in this retail especially is having great ads that are targeting a customer specifically isn't just the domain of the big players anymore, right? The capabilities of something like TikTok or Instagram Reels to learn about what you like based off of your behavior and then serve you targeted ads. You can be a very, very small retail company and still go viral, still hit and get lots of customers. So I think it's the democratization of personalization is a very, very useful aspect of retail, even though most retail companies aren't doing it themselves, right? They're working with other companies to be able to accomplish it. And it's all based off of how much data you have, right?
So that poses a very interesting question. I know that retailers tend to go by, if you're in a fashion retail, building, creating and manufacturing all those things, which is a fashion retail. Sometimes they go by the trends of what people like, the creative instincts, versus now the AI is about data, like you say, research and all those things. So where you see the balance here, that still retailer are adopting the creative instincts versus the data-driven approach of AI?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I would start by saying try not to think of the numbers and the math behind AI and the data-driven approach and the creative approach as opposites, right? I care, as head of data science at a fashion company, I'm never going to say, based off of all this generative AI models and all of this work, we think this is the perfect product for you to be able to launch, right? Predicting fashion trends is very, very difficult. A lot of people have tried, a lot of people have failed, and we're just not there yet, if we ever even will get there, right? But I think if you can build a model that is useful rather than accurate and be able to deploy those useful tools across the business, that's going to be where you're going to see most of the gains. So don't think of them as opposite sides, creativity versus data. Think about how do you make them more useful. So you can think of if you can give creative people who are actually designing our products and determining what our assortments and our marketing campaigns are going to look like, the tools to better able to measure the impact of their actions. That's already a win, right? Think about how you use the data to measure the impact of things rather than how you use it to create the best, the best selling shoe or the best selling handbag, for instance.
So in terms of that when you talking about the creative side of it, so we tend to design something with the customer behavior or customer journey. Now I know there's 10 years back there's a big buzzword of omni-channel. Now there's a different thing and things are changing and adopting. So where you see that the customer journey in terms of that how you're presenting something to the customer based on their journey, it can be the retail side of it or online side of it or app side of it. Where you see the most change happen in this adopting this AI behavior?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer because when you think about a customer journey, a lot of it comes down to how do you even track that a customer has done that journey, right? And you kind of have to personalize with the data that you have available. So, if we want to be able to measure the impact of our advertising campaigns that we've put out in different social media platforms, if somebody clicks on an ad and directly buys something, great. That's very easy to measure, right? But if somebody sees a TikTok ad and then they happen to see it on Facebook and then they happen to see it on YouTube, they don't actually click on one of those ads, you have to build models usually to infer, right? It can be very tricky to figure out, okay, somebody has seen these things. Or, the impact of seeing more New Balance shoes in the subway, seeing whatever product it is in your real life, right? You know that your advertising is having some sort of impact, but how do you actually quantify it in a useful way? So I think defining what you can measure out of a customer journey is kind of almost the first step, right? If you have your own websites and you can track customer behavior through the website, you can learn something about what people do when they get to your website. But there's so many paths for a company to let people hear about your brand. There's so many paths for a customer to learn about a brand that you can't easily measure. So for me, if you want to actually personalize a customer journey, you do it at the level of data that you have at the time you're trying to make that decision. So, if you're doing it on if you're working with TikTok to advertise, they have a lot of data about people's preferences, what they like to watch, and you can define a certain kind of journey there. They can even try to understand, okay, people who watch certain types of videos are more likely to click on certain types of ads, or even purchase those products. And then they have that data and you can leverage it. But if you're talking about a brand like a New Balance or like any sort of brand that has a significant wholesale component, there's a lot of ways that customers are purchasing your products where you might not have that data. So it's really, personalization is possible, but it depends so much on the data that you have to define the customer journey based off the data that you have.
But do you, that's an interesting point about the social media. What I've seen and the recent report, one of the podcasts talking about the social media in the Gartner podcast, they were saying that now the TikTok algorithm or other social platform, which is like instant, it can switch the behavior within matter of seconds. Means if you can engage in one particular reel, then the entire reel can change. So now when we talked about the personalization, how do you see that targeting individual versus the mass? Because I know that segmentation was one of the thing back then, 10 years back, but now segmentation, maybe I'm on one IP, my entire family looking at the same reel, or my daughter can see one reel and then it just adopted that AI. Do you see that kind of behavior changing the entire customer journey and the personalization?
I think for things like that, it's really important to find the signal in the noise, right? If there, and that's again where it comes down to measurement and figuring out you've done some sort of action, you've created some sort of ad, or you've partnered with somebody to deliver ads on their social media platform. Figuring out how do you actually measure if that's useful and it's giving you the ROI that you want is going to be really hard. So if there is some sort of signal that says, hey, if somebody starts watching tennis videos of Coco Graf or something like that, and it makes it more likely for them to buy a New Balance shoe, then yeah, sure, we can go down that path. But I would, if it is something that is very dynamic and very fast, I would want to make sure, okay, the ROI is there. If they do this kind of behavior, you can measure the impact and it increases their likelihood of clicking on an ad or making a purchase. But otherwise, if you don't have that measurement, it's almost noise to me, I guess. Where
do you see the challenges comes in, the key challenges adopting this AI solution? I know it's use case basis, but where do you see the most challenging part?
I would actually go not towards the data itself. I would actually go towards culture. So a company, I think a lot of ways that AI projects fail at companies is because the culture isn't there to support it. Right, and we talked a little bit about how do you find a balance between creativity and data driven and making sure that everybody involved kind of understands, you can use data as a tool to help you with your job. It's not trying to replace your job or completely, tell you what to do and you have to follow our AI overlords no matter what they do. But how do you use AI in a way that it's going to make your job better? Make your job easier, give you new capabilities. So when I talk about challenges, I think, yes, everybody has bad data somewhere. Everybody might have challenges deploying things in a useful way, but a lot of those problems can be solved with culture. So if you deploy a project, some sort of data science or AI project, making sure that the culture is there to use it, the culture is there to understand where its strengths and weaknesses are, to measure the impact, and have leadership buy-in to kind of push that all the way through and make sure that people are following through on leveraging AI as best as it can be. Because it all starts with people, no matter what,
Absolutely.
right? People are going to be generating your data, people are going to be building your models, people are going to be using the models, your customers are going to be looking at these, and if you don't have the right culture to be able to support truly transformative and useful AI, it's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't matter how good your data is.
So I know this is like a sort of a dated topic right now, like COVID, but that actually also sort of changed the behavior of buying. From retail to online shift happened, and then it moved back to retail in somewhat way. Where do you see the trend? And I'm going to add something recently I've seen a lot, especially in the East Coast region, especially where I am in New Jersey, that a lot of small sort of hyper markets are being constructed. And they've been very much busy all the time. They're busy. Few of them, in my area, they're just completely constructed. And the moment they announce it, every store gets sold, leased or something. So do you see the retail in-store experience, brick and mortar, is coming if you do it right, or is just slowly dying down and then online is gonna be the thing? Where do you see because you are a data guy, so I would just love to hear from you what data is showing?
Yeah. I mean, the data out there for especially any sort of public retail company is out there, right? You can look at what happened during COVID, and for a lot of places, their e-com sales did this, right? They shot up, right? Because that was the only way you could purchase.
Only purchase, yeah.
And then, there's different economic challenges. Places started opening up once we dealt with COVID as well as we could. So, e-com started leveling off, started going down. So a lot of companies are having to anniversary growth numbers in e-com that were very, very high, right? So they're not, and e-com's not going to grow that way consistently across all businesses. And a lot of that is because, people do want to go out, they do want to go to stores. That's the anecdote you had right there. That's a very good example, right? You create a new center and it's at least immediately, right?
Yep.
Because there is still that demand out there. So, you talked a little bit about the omni journey earlier, and I think that's important. If you are a company, a retail brand that has a physical brick and mortar presence, you want to tie that into your e-com experience, right? If you really want a truly omni experience for your brand, you want people to walk into your stores and kind of get a similar experience to what they were getting if they're online. That might be certain ways of presenting your products, certain brand stories that you're trying to tell. It could be a level of customer service, whatever it is that you are identifying as important for your brand to maintain a consistent consumer experience. You've got to lean into that both on e-com or retail, because I think, it's basic math. If you're an omni consumer, you've shopped at a brand at least twice, right? That's better than a just an e-com or just an in-store consumer. So, but people aren't going to do that. Go to both your website and in-store unless they really believe in your brand and they really want to buy something from you. And that kind of starts with making sure you're giving a good consumer experience regardless. AI can have a role there for sure. AI can have a role in personalization. AI can have a role in figuring out where do you put your stores to match the consumer need that is around. How do you measure the effectiveness of all of these? But at the very end, if you are getting new consumers and getting good feedback, that's a great way to figure out if these kind of strategies are actually useful.
So you mentioned initially about the different elements of AI, predictive AI, I'll just talk about. So if I double click of this behavior between online and store, do you see that the predictive analytics is still used in terms of the inventory management or forecasting? So how that's actually working out in terms of where to put what, that if there's an omni behavior of a shopper that looking at the store, buying it online, or looking at online and buying it in a store, do you see that actually impact the supply chain as well?
Yeah, it definitely can. And again, I'm gonna say this a lot, but again, it all depends on the data you have, right?
Okay.
If somebody buys online, they give you their address. You have a lot of information. You know about that consumer.
Yeah.
So if they are a repeat purchaser, they're gonna have this. They'll have this similar name, same name, usually the same address, and you can tie those things together. But if you're in the store, sometimes it's very hard to capture that information, right? A lot of places aren't capturing consumer credit cards to be able to tie that information, right? We have laws, we have regulations we have to follow around the kinds of information that we can collect, and that varies across the globe.
The beacon technology used to be like, that ping the phone as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like, if you can get something like that, and you aren't, there are concerns about privacy and being creepy, right? Yeah. You want, if you want somebody to come back to your brand, your retail brand, but they've had a bad experience with like some sort of weird targeting or personalization they didn't like, you have to understand that those kind of risks exist. Absolutely. So, making sure that you have good ways to capture consumer information both in store and online are critical. Otherwise, you can't really tie things together, right? You might think you have more new customers than you actually have. You might think you might not be able to truly personalize something because they've shopped online and in store, and you didn't tie those two transactions together. So it all comes down to data, no matter what we do. But I think that when you talk about being able to understand consumer behavior in an omni perspective and how it relates to supply chain, that can be very powerful, especially for, if you think about like a CPG brand, like an Amazon. I mean, I order probably, a dozen times a month on Amazon, something like that, right? So they have a lot of information about me. They can know I bought an air filter 6 months ago and I need a new one. They know like the last time I bought liquid death mountain water, whatever it might be, right? So, but when you were thinking about a brand a luxury fashion brand where people may shop with you once every couple of years, that becomes much, much harder. But as soon as you can get some sort of omni information that says this is a typical customer journey with your brand, this is what people tend to buy together, either in the same transaction or over time, that can flow all the way through to your supply chain. Okay. It can help you understand things like, if we're buying a lot more shoes, should we buy a lot more socks? Like, how many customers buy socks and shoes together, right? How many do that over time? Which, again, you have to have the right data to tie those customers together. And even like all the way down to how do you place things in factories. So if you notice things are being purchased together or over time by consumers in similar ways, and you don't want to have to ship them from two locations, put them in the same factory. So as long as you have good data, it can have a huge impact on your supply chain. Yeah.
So you mentioned Amazon, and in the world of Amazon, when recently there's a new online retailers, Temu, Shein. I'm just going to talk very quickly before I ask you this thing. Temu actually created a very different way of shopping behavior. It's like instant, knee-jerk. Like, you do this in 30 minutes, you buy this, 1 cent and stuff. Do you think the AI can manipulate of buying behavior of a customer?
Yes. And a lot of that has to do with advertising or structuring your website, or how you phrase things in certain ways to make people feel good, right? Like, it is true, like nobody needs to buy luxury products in many cases, right? They aren't necessary for us to live. So it's all about, you aren't going to get somebody to spend $3,000 on a jacket or $10,000 on a handbag unless they really love it, right? There's an emotional connection there that drives them to actually want to do that. So when you think about something like a Temu, that fast fashion, they're going for like a very quick dopamine hit, which is the whole, how TikTok works. It's how TikTok makes money. YouTube makes money. They're about keeping people on those platforms. And so if you start seeing ads or influencers doing things, it's all about that essentially emotional manipulation, emotional driving you to buying that product. And so and it's necessary for like all of these products that we sell that aren't necessarily required for us to live. You've got to have some sort of emotional connection, and I'm saying it in a little bit of a negative way, but like that's a very positive thing. Like if we aren't curing cancer when we're selling more luxury products, but we are making people happy. And so I'm saying emotional manipulation, but that's a very negative way to say, yes, you want people to feel good when they're buying your product so that they do it again. And a lot of that involves making sure that you are giving consumers an emotional experience that they want. So you're not being too creepy, you're not being too negative, you're making them feel good about their purchase so they want to come back.
So do you think because of this, all those different vendors are coming, there will be some call responsible AI or ethical side of AI will come, which can not going to create some bias or some transparency on shopping behavior, especially on the retail side of it?
Yeah.
You think this something is there or is going to come?
So there are regulations and guidelines that are out there. A lot of companies aren't required to follow them, right?
Okay.
So the Biden administration put out some regulations about what federal federal organizations or companies that do business with the federal government should follow. This is a very fast evolving, very dynamic field of law right now. Like, things are going to be settled in courts in the next few years probably. So this is all dynamic. But all of that said, like, just because there aren't rules that you have to follow doesn't mean there shouldn't be ethical guidelines, right? Okay. You don't want to deploy an algorithm that's going to accidentally be racist or cause issues that are going to reflect negatively on your brand. Both, you just want to be a good person, but if we were producing an algorithm, let's say, at a retail company that turned out to treat customers differently or give certain discounts to customers of one race over another, like, that would be awful, right? You want to avoid that, not only because you want to be a brand that people can believe in and trust, but it's going to lead to negative outcomes if it gets out, right? Ethical guidelines around AI aren't just nice to haves, they're critical, in my opinion. Because for me, data science, it's there's numbers, there's math, but it's all about trust. So exactly. Nobody's going to want to use an AI model unless they believe it's going to do a better job than if they didn't use that AI model. No consumer is going to necessarily want to work with a company that just constantly hear negative news about their overreaches in privacy, their negative uses of AI models. I mean, that news gets out and people can have negative reactions, which can have an actual monetary impact on brands. And when you're at a fashion company, a retail company, where your brand image and how cool you are and what people think of you is the reason that they are willing to pay high prices for your products, making sure that brand vision follows, flows through every part of it, even the boring math models on the underlying demand forecasting or whatever it might be. You still have to make sure that those models aren't going to be biased and doing things inaccurately or doing things that don't align with your brand values.
So there's a lot of trends happening. You mentioned that. So where do you see from a fashion retail perspective that in next 2 to 3 years where this is heading and what's your modeling talking about? Let's just talk about your models.
I mean, I think I can give the answer. That's around yes, generative AI is still going to have an impact. Okay. The ability of generative AI to help people do their jobs better, to go through ideas, both design ideas, writing an email a little bit easier, a little bit faster, reviewing legal documents, whatever it may be. That's still gonna be there, and it's still gonna get better, and it's still going to increase in penetration across different companies. More people are going to use that. But I would actually say, I think as the AI hype is growing, and it's continued to grow with generative AI coming out, more companies are trying to do AI projects. And they're doing POCs with companies, with startups. They're hiring their own internal data science teams. And a lot of projects they do aren't necessarily leading to the ROI that they'd want. And this can vary across industries for sure. I'm speaking generally about some things that I've seen at various companies. But when you're deploying an AI project, a data science model, one of the best outcomes is you're trying to build a data science model and you realize you don't have data to support it. And then you have to be okay, well, if we want to accomplish this, we need to fix this data. And just the basic idea, and I thought this over 5 years ago, I still think it today. If companies really want to be good at data science, they have to have really good data, and that's the biggest impact. Because if people have different ideas, if you're at a company and two different business units are saying things are going great, but you add it together and it's not going great, what's the source of truth, right? So having a consistent source of truth that everybody believes in, and you have accurate data that's useful from monitoring to analytics to data science, that's where I think the biggest impact on a lot of companies is going to be, just fixing their crappy data.
So what one piece of advice you would give to any retail companies who's starting their AI journey?
I would say start small and be boring. And because there is a lot of AI hype wave, right? Generative AI is great. It's cool. I use it every day, personally and professionally, within the regulations that I'm required for my company, of course. But it's those are flashy, great projects, but it's a lot harder to get clear ROI on those. We say we deployed this chatbot on our website, and it made us this much money. But if you can be boring and fix just some basic thing in how you do allocation, or basic problem in how you do demand forecasting, or even just measure your accuracy in those things that you're already doing without AI, that's going to have a much bigger monetary impact. Like we're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of impact at a large company, that you don't have to do that much work to get done. It's leveraging the tools you already have, but maybe making sure you're measuring things in the right way, making sure you've got the right data to support the challenges that you want. So if you really want to make money with data science, be boring. Go to the boring logistics, supply chain, measurement stuff. That's where you can make a lot of impact.
Okay. So one last question, and this is, I think, I always wanted to ask, especially on a fashion brand like New Balance, that, or any this. Wherever I see the commercials of all those fashion brands, they never talked about how sturdy they are, how good they are. Rather, they get the best athletes or best influencers to just wear those things and then showcase that. Is it something, the behavior for those fashion retailers, customers, that they don't care about the quality of this thing, rather the experience of this thing?
Got it. That's interesting. I would say, and I'm just going to speak generally here, but yes, influencers are important, and so but having influencers that sort of match your brand, the message that you want your brand to convey is also important. So if you're somebody who's trying to get a bunch of really cool fashion forward influencers, you've got to find the right ones that'll match the specific type of cool and fashion forward you're trying to do. If you're a sports company, do you want those athletes who are very serious and very competitive and are very focused and driven, or do you want the ones that are a little bit nicer, a little bit happier, maybe smile, interact more? You have to think about those things very carefully, and you've got to be able to measure the impact, right? So you talked about fashion, about comfortable, durable. Being able to measure how people perceive your brand, that can actually be, you can use generative AI to do that, right? Scrape websites, scrape reviews, get social media data, and see what are people actually talking about when they talk about your brand. And people are more likely to post on social media when they have negative things to say, so there's always that kind of bias. But you can see try to understand when people talk about your brand, what do they think about? What do they care about? What are the words? What are the emotions that that elicits? And you can lean into that. You can understand if maybe that's not the perception you want, and then you can use that to help guide your marketing. So I think AI can have an impact there, and with generative AI, it's becoming much, much easier because you can collect just tens of thousands of reviews and social media posts and summarize them relatively easy. You don't need a person reading through every single one of them and grading them as whether they're positive or negative. Are they talking about comfort? Do they not like the fit? Do they like the material and the construction? So those capabilities are becoming much, much more widespread now because it's easier to do.
You must laugh when someone tried to sell you something online, that you say, well, this is what I know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I still definitely fall to some of the advertising tricks, but knowing about them does make you a little bit more resilient to it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. It was very interesting conversation, and I'm sure our audience love it. I know this topic is endless. We can talk so much more.
Oh yeah.
But with the time we have, so thank you very much for listening in. If you have a question for Josh, please put on the comment box. We'll try to get him again. If you have a lot of questions, we'll request him. If there's a question, please come back to us. Looking forward to this transformation on retail. Till next time.